Candace Owens didn't just walk onto the Howard University stage. She arrived, all red blazer and certainty, the kind you wear like armor when you've never been caught flat-footed on camera. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted a mic and offered a smile so small you could miss it, unless you've seen that smile in courtrooms where confidence meets preparation and only one walks out intact. The billing said, "The future of black politics." The room said something else. "Tonight decides who gets to define the future." The moderator barely finished her intro when Candace lit the fuse. "I'm standing in a building where young black minds are poisoned daily by victimhood, and Congresswoman Crockett is here to keep the IV running." Gasps. Boos, cheers, exactly the cocktail Owens has harvested for years. She thrives on friction. Cameras love sparks. But tonight, the sound you really needed to hear wasn't in the mic. It was 1,000 phones unlocking at once. Because here's what no one tells you about debating on a campus like Howard. The crowd is not a prop. It's a hive mind with Wi-Fi. And while Candace rolled through her greatest hits, Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, the failed city's refrain, thumbs started flying. Links started dropping, and for the first time all night, her applause line met. Silence. Not the stunned kind. The skeptical kind. Jasmine let the opening barrage finish. She didn't roll her eyes. Didn't sigh into the mic. She waited. Then, "Miss Owens, I sleep very well. Not because I agree with you, but because I don't make my living selling out my community for applause." It wasn't a scream. It was a scalpel. The room exhaled. Candace smiled the way people smile when they've rehearsed the counterpunch. There it is, the sellout line. She paced, hands slicing the air. When you can't debate facts, you attack the person. Plantation mentality, case closed. Except it wasn't, because Jasmine wasn't trying to win the clip. She was trying to win the case. And the difference between a clip and a case is everything. "Detroit?" she said, glancing at her notes like a formality. "You forgot what's changed in the last years. Baltimore? You left out the state-level blocks on major investment. Chicago? You jump-cut the part where disinvestment wasn't an accident. Not a rant, bullet points. Not heat, paperwork. And then the turn. Name one Republican policy in the last 30 years specifically designed to help black Americans." 1. The auditorium went still in that way that makes time move differently. Candace reached for the familiar, opportunity zones, growth talk, capital flows. In another room, on another night, that would land. Here it didn't. Not because the words were wrong, because the frame was. Jasmine stepped through it like a door left ajar. Projects that were already planned. Luxury going up. Neighbors priced out. "That's your model?" She wasn't mad, she was documenting. Candace pivoted. "If facts turn sticky, go personal. At least I'm not taking money from George Soros and radical left outfits. How much to be their token?" The sound wasn't gasping now. It was wincing. Jasmine's expression didn't spike. It settled. "I want you to repeat that," she said even. "You called me a token?" Candace couldn't walk it back. She doubled down. "If the shoe fits." Here's the moment people will re-watch in slow motion. Jasmine doesn't answer the insult. She indicts the frame. "So in your world, any black person who disagrees with you is brainwashed or bought. Not a citizen, not a colleague. A puppet." She let that hang, then moved, deeper into the file. "You say Democrats failed. Then you ignore your own side's record where it counts. You talk schools without conditions, crime without causes, money without maintenance. And you forgot the first rule of court. Context is king." Candace went back to the numbers. Baltimore per pupil spend, low proficiency scores, the chart junk rhythm that usually steamrolls nuance. Jasmine didn't debate the numerators. She introduced denominators. Special education, transportation, buildings older than most parents in the room. "You know what's wild?" she asked, finally looking over. "You grew up in Stamford, 19,000 a student. Olympic pools, counselors in every hall. Money didn't matter then? The room didn't cheer. It shifted. There's a sound to it, like furniture moving on a floor above you. What you do," Jasmine said almost softly, "is turn people's realities into props for your monologues. I didn't have the luxury. I had clients, human beings, whose lives changed if I prepared or if I didn't. I prepared." She didn't spike the football. She built the next play. Let's talk about your record, Candace braced. Everyone in the internet era has a file, but most audiences don't carry it in their pocket. Howard does. Jasmine invoked the old site, the old quotes, the rupture between monster then and megaphone now, not as gossip, but as incentive mapping. Did he change, she asked, or did the checks? Candace said what anyone would say under those lights. People evolve. True, also incomplete. Because evolution comes with fossils, and the room had seen the strata stacked. Then the question that changed the temperature in a way no producer could script. Do you still stand by what you said about George Floyd? Candace tried to thread the needle. I follow facts. Jasmine didn't grandstand. She recited the basics, and here's why the moment landed. She honored the memory without asking the crowd to perform grief on cue. It wasn't a speech. It was a mirror. The first clap came from a student standing up by herself, cheeks wet, hands steady. Then the second. Then the room. Candace's face said what her words couldn't. You can't power pose your way through a pivot this big. Not when the audience has already decided which voice they trust with the facts in the frame. The moderator cut to break like a lifeguard spotting a rip current. Cameras went dark. Phones didn't. When the lights returned, the geometry of the stage had changed. Same podiums, different gravity. Talking points that rocked auditoriums last month suddenly felt like karaoke after the band leaves. Jasmine didn't gloat, she governed. She answered with timelines and dollar amounts, not vibes. Candace tried to reclaim altitude with slogans, but altitude is a function of thrust and air. The air was gone. If you want to know how a room decides, it's in the 5-year question. Candace improvised about waking people up, and it sounded like someone searching for a landing strip that wasn't there. Jasmine sketched an agenda with verbs. Fewer fireworks, more fixtures. The applause was not explosive. It was enduring, and the exit told the rest. One path angled toward a side door and a waiting phalanx. The other curved down to the floor where a knot of students, future lawyers, teachers, organizers, were already forming a line. Not for selfies, for questions, for conversation, for receipts. That's when you realized what the title of the night really was. Not the future of black politics. Something narrower, harder, and far more useful. What happens when performance meets preparation? Candace Owens has made a career of going first. Don't wait for the moderator to finish the question. Don't give your opponent a beat to gather breath. Go in swinging, and if the words are loud enough, sharp enough, and polished enough for clips, the battle is already won. That's how she opened at Howard. Abby Phillip had barely started framing the first topic, economic policy in black communities, when Candace cut across her. The poverty rate in black neighborhoods has barely moved under Democrats. Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, same misery, same excuses. And Congresswoman Crockett votes to keep it all going. The delivery was vintage Owens, voice rising and falling like a preacher, stats ready at hand, finger stabbing the air at her opponent. It's the rhythm that has carried her through rallies, cable hits, and viral monologues. The conservative slice of the Howard crowd, smaller but vocal, jumped in with chants. Facts, facts, facts. They knew the drill. The energy was exactly what her team wanted captured on camera. Rowdy, combative, a conservative warrior unafraid to storm the lion's den. But then came the sound Owens wasn't used to. A shuffle of chairs, a rustle of backpacks, and the distinct buzz of phones coming alive. Not to record her words, to check them. Students hunched forward, screens glowing, typing Baltimore poverty rate 2023 and Detroit population growth statistics. Within seconds, posts were circulating under hashtags like Duck Howard Debate. A poli-sci major tweeted, Owens just quoted Baltimore poverty numbers from 2010. Current data shows major improvement. That tweet was already rippling across the auditorium by the time Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. Crockett didn't match Owens's volume. She didn't return the fire with fire. She sat still, adjusted the mic with one hand, and said evenly, Miss Owens, I sleep very well at night. Do you know why? Because unlike you, I don't make my living selling out my community for Fox News checks. The auditorium cracked open. Gasps, scattered applause, laughter from the back rows. And Candace, used to having the sharpest quip on stage, saw her punchline get out-punched. But she had rehearsed for this. She knew someone would throw the sellout grenade, and she had a rebuttal polished and ready. She smiled tightly, threw her arms wide, and said, "There it is. The plantation mentality. When you can't debate facts, you attack character. I'm a sellout because I dare to think differently. They can't handle a strong black woman who won't bow to the Democratic overseers. In Turning Point ballrooms, in CPAC halls, that line hits like a drum. Standing ovation. Thunderous applause. Not here. At Howard, it floated into a room suddenly heavy with skepticism. Some laughed, not with her but at the performance. In the front row, a student shook her head slowly, deliberately, so that Candace could see. The silence that followed wasn't a void. It was a verdict, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't even really started. She leaned into her notes, casual as if reviewing an old case file. "Detroit? You failed to mention that under Mayor Mike Duggan, the city saw its first population growth in 60 years. Baltimore? You skipped the part where Republican Governor Larry Hogan blocked billions in development funding. Chicago? You cut out the context that the neighborhoods you highlight were hollowed out by Republican trade policies decades ago. Context matters, Miss Owens. If you're going to bring statistics into this building, at least have the decency to bring the whole picture. No theatrics. No insult, just receipts laid flat." The difference was glaring. Owens had gone for spectacle. Crockett had come with binders. Candace tried to reclaim the initiative by circling back to her talking points. But the bottom line is black communities have been stuck in poverty for 60 years. That's the Democratic record. That's the truth. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. She looked directly at Candace and asked, "Then name one Republican policy in the last 30 years that specifically helped black Americans." Just one. The silence in the hall wasn't the quiet of boredom. It was the anticipation of a chess crowd waiting for the clock to tick. Owens blinked, recovered, and reached for her best option. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, the so-called Opportunity Zones program. She started laying it out, statistics about investment flows and revitalization. On cable, it would have been enough to run the clock. Here, it was a setup line, because Jasmine already had the research ready. She cut in smoothly. The Urban Institute studied those zones. Most of the investment went into projects that were already planned. Luxury hotels, high-end condos. You know who got displaced? The very families you claim to care about. That's your one example? That's Republican success? The room leaned forward. Phones recording now, not to fact-check but to capture the exchange. They knew they were witnessing something unusual. Candace Owens, whose career was built on putting others on defense, was herself struggling to defend. And Jasmine didn't waste the momentum. She pressed. "You bring half-truths and slogans. I bring receipts. You build your career on clips. I built mine on cases. You want to play prosecutor tonight, Miss Owens? That's fine. But remember, I've done this in real courtrooms against real prosecutors. And I don't rattle easy." Candace's supporters tried to revive the facts. Facts chant. But it sounded thinner now, like an echo of a show that had lost its rhythm. The larger crowd wasn't buying volume anymore. They were buying verification. For Owens, this was the first sign that the playbook wasn't working. Usually, an aggressive opening throws the opponent into defense mode. Tonight, her opponent stayed calm, fact-checked in real time, and turned the frame back on her. Usually, a sharp plantation soundbite gets a room buzzing. Tonight, it got laughs and headshakes. Usually, she rides the momentum of being the bold truth-teller. Tonight, the truth was riding against her. And the night was just beginning, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished with facts. She had cross-examinations ready. She had files on Candace's flip-flops. She had context on schools, crime, and education spending. And she knew something Candace hadn't realized until now. This wasn't a performance crowd. This was a study group, and they came with homework. The first round had ended. Owens had swung hard and expected Crockett to crumble. Instead, Crockett had caught the punches, shrugged, and asked for the syllabus. As Abby Phillip glanced down at her notes, preparing the next question, Candace adjusted her blazer, smiling a little too tightly, gripping the microphone a little too firmly. She was realizing something every performer dreads. The crowd wasn't here for a show. They were here for substance, and Jasmine Crockett had brought plenty of that. Candace Owens had weathered her share of pushback before. She'd been booed at campuses, jeered on panels, and roasted on late-night shows. Normally that was her fuel. Conflict meant clicks, and clicks meant validation. But the silence after Jasmine Crockett's challenge, name one Republican policy in the last 30 years that specifically helped Black Americans, wasn't the kind of silence she knew how to spin. It wasn't the silence of a hostile crowd waiting to pounce. It was the silence of a jury waiting for an answer. She reached for the lifeline that had worked before. Opportunity zones. It was a safeguard. A Republican talking point polished in think tank boardrooms and rolled out at rallies. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 created opportunity zones, she said, voice steadying as she clung to the words. Billions of dollars in private investment flowed into struggling communities, giving entrepreneurs a chance and creating jobs. That's real Republican impact. The conservative supporters in the back cheered, grateful for something solid to hold on to. But the rest of the room stayed stone-faced, because Jasmine was already on her feet. Opportunity zones? She asked, eyebrows raised. She picked up a sheet of paper like a lawyer about to read an exhibit into evidence. Let's talk about what really happened. A study from the Urban Institute found that most of those investments went to projects already planned. Luxury condos, boutique hotels, high-end office towers. Do you know who benefited? Developers. Do you know who got pushed out? Black families who had lived in those neighborhoods for generations. That's not policy for us. That's profit for them. The room erupted, but Jasmine wasn't done. She paced slowly, voice rising just enough to slice through the applause. So I'll ask you again, Miss Owens. Can you name one Republican policy in the last 30 years that was designed to help Black Americans, and actually did? Candace's smile faltered. The Opportunity Zones line had always been a reliable shield, but here it was turning into a sword pointed at her. She tried to pivot. What I see is a Democratic Party that… Jasmine cut her off, calm but sharp. No, we're not talking about Democrats yet. We're talking about your side. One policy. Just one. The silence stretched. Candace exhaled, tilted her head, and switched tactics. If the facts were slippery, make it personal. At least I'm not taking money from George Soros and radical left organizations like you are, Congresswoman. Tell me, how much did they pay you to be their token? This time the gasp wasn't just from students. It came from faculty in the front rows, from alumni sprinkled through the auditorium, even from a handful of Candace's own fans. The air shifted, heavy, uncomfortable. It wasn't the bold, defiant shot she thought it would be. It was a line that landed wrong, the way a comedian knows a joke has bombed before the punchline is even finished. Jasmine didn't snap back. She didn't frown. She didn't even look angry. She tilted her head slightly, almost pitying, and said, Miss Owens, I want you to repeat that. Did you just call me a token? Candace hesitated, but doubling down had always been her brand. She squared her shoulders. If the shoe fits, yes. You're doing exactly what your white liberal donors want you to do. That's when Jasmine changed gears. She wasn't just debating anymore. She was cross-examining. She repeated Candace's words back slowly. So in your world, any black person who disagrees with you is either brainwashed or bought. There's no possibility that we've looked at the evidence and come to different conclusions. No possibility that we act out of conviction. We're all just puppets on strings. Is that what you're saying? Candace tried to cut in. What I'm saying is, but Jasmine didn't let her. She pressed. Because that's not argument, Miss Owens, that's erasure. That's you denying agency to millions of Black Americans who simply don't buy what you're selling. And when you do that here, in front of students who will be the next generation of lawyers, doctors, organizers, leaders, you're not debating. You're insulting their intelligence. The students cheered, louder this time. Phones shut up in unison, capturing every word. This was the kind of exchange destined for TikTok, clipped into 30-second sound bites and looped endlessly. Candace tried to push back with volume, raising her voice, pacing across the stage. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle a different opinion, so you smear it. You call it disrespect. You cry insult. This is the plantation mindset in action. But the words felt recycled, hollow. The energy wasn't there. At a rally, the line would trigger applause like clockwork. At Howard, the line felt tired. A group of students in the front row actually chuckled, shaking their heads, and Jasmine, sensing the weakness, leaned in. No, Miss Owens, you're not a sellout because you think differently. You're a sellout because you deliberately misrepresent facts to attack your own people. You take half-truths, strip out the context, and package it for an audience that isn't living our reality. That's not courage. That's opportunism. The crowd was roaring now, standing in places, clapping, stomping. Abby Phillips, sitting at the moderator's table, raised her hands to try and calm the noise, but it didn't matter. The dynamic had shifted. Candace gripped her microphone harder, her free hand fidgeting at her blazer cuff. She looked out at the sea of faces, searching for the friendly ones, the nodding ones, the supporters who always showed up. But even some of her allies looked uneasy, and Jasmine wasn't finished. She lifted her notes again, voice cutting clean through the chaos. You came here expecting easy applause for old slogans, but you forgot where you were. This isn't a Turning Point rally. This isn't a Fox News panel. This is Howard University. These students don't need sound bites, they need answers. And so far, Miss Owens, you haven't given them any. The crowd went wild again, but Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just turned calmly and waited for Abby Phillips' next question. Candace, meanwhile, adjusted her mic again, breathing harder than before. Her red blazer still gleamed under the lights, but something in her posture had changed. She didn't look like the conquering hero anymore. She looked like someone realizing for the first time in a long time that her usual playbook wasn't working. The first trap had sprung, and Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. Candace Owens had built her reputation on making others stumble. Corner them with quick stats, hit them with a zinger, then bask in the viral moment. But for the first time, she was the one cornered. And Jasmine Crockett was just warming up. Abby Phillips shifted the debate to education. Both of you have spoken about opportunities in black communities. Let's talk about schools. Before the question was even complete, Candace pounced, her voice sharp and confident again. The biggest scam pushed on black America is that more funding equals better results. Baltimore spends over $16,000 per student, yet the schools are among the worst in the nation. 13% proficiency in math, 16% in reading. Those are the facts, Congresswoman. The numbers don't lie. She waved her phone like a weapon, reading directly from a chart. Her supporters cheered again, grateful for something familiar, something clean. Owens straightened, feeling the rush of having data on her side. The problem isn't money, it's the victimhood mentality Democrats promote. Are you willing to admit your policies are failing our children? The room was buzzing, half with applause, half with irritation. For a moment, it looked like Candace had regained the rhythm. But Jasmine just smiled, that same calm, steady smile from the beginning. Please, she said, gesturing to Owens, read all your data. I'm very interested, Candace blinked, sensing the trap but unable to back out. I just did. 16,400 per student. Failing grades. Those are facts, Jasmine nodded. Yes, the numbers don't lie. But you do! The auditorium exploded. Cheers, shouts, phones flying into the air to record. Candace's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned into the mic, voice even and deliberate, like she was addressing a jury. First, that $16,400 isn't just classroom instruction. It includes special education costs, transportation, building maintenance, expenses that are higher in older urban districts where schools average nearly 50 years old. When you strip it down to direct instructional spending, Baltimore ranks 47th out of 50. Context matters, Owens interjected. That's still no excuse for failing grades. Jasmine raised a hand slightly, her courtroom instincts kicking in. Second, you forgot to mention that Republican Governor Larry Hogan withheld nearly $3 billion in approved education funding from Baltimore. So if you're going to blame Democrats, at least have the honesty to acknowledge Republican sabotage. Third, you ignored the fact that many Baltimore schools still lack working heat, air conditioning, or safe drinking water. Do you want to talk about test scores when kids are sweating in 90-degree classrooms? The room erupted again, this time with stomps and chants. Candace tried to force a smile, but her knuckles were white around the microphone, and then Jasmine delivered the dagger. You know what's really interesting, Miss Owens? You grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. Per pupil spending at your high school? Nearly $19,000. Your school had Olympic-sized pools, cutting-edge technology, and college counselors for every student. But now you want to tell kids in Baltimore that money doesn't matter. That's not just dishonest, it's insulting, the audience roared. Owens tried to interject. I didn't say, but Jasmine pressed forward, relentless. And speaking of your background, Didn't you receive financial aid to attend the University of Rhode Island? Didn't you benefit from programs designed to help students afford college? But now you oppose those same programs for other black students. Tell me, Miss Owens, when exactly did opportunity stop being valuable? After it helped you, Candace stammered. That's not the point. Jasmine cut her off again, her tone sharper now. No, that is the point. Because you want to slam the door shut behind you. You want to enjoy the benefits of public spending, scholarships, and resources, then tell everyone else those things don't matter. That's hypocrisy, plain and simple. The room was on its feet. Students clapping, faculty nodding, cameras flashing. Owens looked out, her usual smirk gone, replaced by a tight jaw and darting eyes. This wasn't the confident firebrand strutting on stage. This was someone cornered, out-prepared, and exposed. She tried one last counter. These are personal attacks. You're going after me instead of addressing the failures of democratic policy. Jasmine actually laughed, the first time her composure cracked into something resembling amusement. Personal attacks. Miss Owens, you called me a token and a plantation overseer. You've built your entire career on attacking black leaders, black institutions, and black communities. But the moment someone examines your record, suddenly you want civility? Spare us! The audience roared louder than ever. Owens shook her head, gripping her mic like a lifeline. I'm exposing the truth. But Jasmine was already pulling out a tablet, scrolling with deliberate precision. Let's talk about your truth. In 2015, you ran a website called Degree 180. You published articles calling Donald Trump a monster and warning about his disturbing behavior toward women. But in 2017, suddenly he was your hero. Tell us, Miss Owens, did Trump change, or did the checks get bigger? The auditorium gasped, then erupted into applause and laughter. Candace's face drained of color. She tried to respond, her voice shaky. People evolve. I saw the light. But Jasmine leaned forward, eyes locked on her opponent. You saw the checks. Your speaking fees went from nothing to $50,000 per event once you became the black woman defending Trump. Your social media following exploded. You went from nobody to somebody by telling white conservatives exactly what they wanted to hear, and now you have the audacity to accuse me of being bought? The crowd was in a frenzy. Students were standing on chairs, clapping, chanting Crockett's name. Owens looked small, her posture shrinking under the lights. Jasmine turned to the audience, her voice steady, her tone sharp as a blade. This, Howard, is what grifting looks like. Someone who will say anything, betray anyone, abandon any principle, for fame and fortune. Miss Owens wants to talk about plantations? She's not trying to free anyone. She's just selling tickets to her own. The crowd exploded in cheers, the loudest of the night. Candace's hands trembled slightly as she lowered her microphone. She looked out at the students, the professors, the cameras, and for the first time in a long time, she had no line ready. No comeback. No slogan. She had been cross-examined, and she had lost. Candace Owens had survived rough debates before. A hostile audience, a sharp opponent, even fact-checkers on standby. None of that was new. What was new was the feeling in the pit of her stomach as Jasmine Crockett flipped through her tablet like a lawyer flipping through exhibits. This wasn't theater anymore. This was discovery. Let's talk about your record, Jasmine said, voice calm but carrying across the auditorium. Because if we're going to discuss integrity and truth, we need to start with yours. Candace tightened her jaw, bracing. She knew what was coming. She'd spent years scrubbing, reframing, trying to bury old quotes. But the internet never forgets, and Jasmine had receipts. In 2015, Jasmine began reading directly from her screen. You ran a website called Degree 180. You published an article that called Donald Trump a monster. You warned that his behavior toward women was, quote, disturbing and dangerous. You accused him of exploiting fear for power. Does that sound familiar, Miss Owens? Candace straightened, trying to smile through it. People evolve, Congresswoman. Unlike Democrats who never changed their failing policies, I had the courage to admit I was wrong about Trump. But Jasmine didn't let her off the hook. Wrong or broke. Because 2 years later, after those comments, you went from nobody to headliner. Suddenly you were the conservative movement's favorite black voice. Suddenly your speaking fees jumped to $50,000 per event. Suddenly your follower count exploded. So tell us, Miss Owens, did Trump evolve or did your paycheck? The crowd erupted, laughter mixing with applause. Candace tried to wave it off, gripping her microphone tighter. This is what Democrats do. They smear. They dig up old quotes instead of debating the present. Jasmine leaned in, her voice sharper now. Old quotes? This isn't ancient history, Miss Owens. This is your record. This is you saying one thing when it suited you, and the exact opposite when the checks got bigger. That's not evolution. That's opportunism. And the reason it matters is because you accuse others, black Democrats, black leaders, of being bought, of being tokens. But when we look at the evidence, the only person who's flipped for profit is you. The students cheered so loudly, Abby Phillip raised her hands for quiet. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She scrolled again. And it's not just Trump. You used to support criminal justice reform until it stopped being profitable. You used to criticize Republicans until they became your audience. You used to call out racism until you realized downplaying it got you TV hits. That's not principle. That's branding, Candace cut in, raising her voice. So what? You're saying people can't change? You're saying if I ever criticize someone, I can never revise my opinion? That's ridiculous. People evolve when they see the truth. Jasmine didn't flinch. People evolve, yes. But integrity doesn't. Integrity means you can explain your evolution. It means you can say, here's what I believe then. Here's why I changed, and here's why I believe differently now. But you never do that. Miss Owens, you just reinvent yourself for the highest bidder. And when anyone points it out, you cry smear. That's not evolution. That's performance. The crowd roared again, chants of receipts. Receipts! Breaking out from the back rows. Candace paced, her trademark smirk slipping as she glanced toward her team at the side of the stage. They were already on their phones, no doubt drafting spin for the disaster unfolding in real time. Jasmine pressed the advantage. And let's be clear, this matters. Because you came here to Howard University to tell these students they're brainwashed, that they're slaves to a party, that they're tokens for white liberals. You came here with insults instead of answers. But when we look at your record, who's the one who flipped? Who's the one cashing checks? Who's the one playing a character for an audience that doesn't live this reality? It's you, Candace raised her voice, almost shouting now. This is character assassination. This is exactly what Democrats do. They destroy people who speak the truth. But the audience wasn't buying it. They'd seen her playbook before. Frame yourself as the victim when the facts get heavy. Tonight it wasn't working. The students weren't sympathetic. They were energized, and Jasmine delivered the final twist of the knife. You want to lecture us about plantations, Miss Owens? Fine, but let's be real. You're not Harriet Tubman. You're P.T. Barnum. You don't free people, you sell tickets. You don't break chains, you build brands. And tonight, everyone here can see the difference. The crowd exploded. Laughter, applause, chants echoing through the auditorium. Candace's face tightened, pale under the stage lights. She looked like someone who had just been caught in a lie and forced to admit it in front of the whole class. But Jasmine wasn't gloating. She wasn't mocking. She was building toward something heavier. She set her tablet down slowly, folded her hands on the podium, and looked straight at Candace. And if you think this is just about old blog posts or flip-flops, you're wrong. This is about what you stand for right now. This is about the things you've said recently, things that go beyond hypocrisy into something much darker. And if you're so proud of speaking the truth, then I want to hear you stand by those words in front of this audience tonight. The room quieted instantly. Everyone could feel it, the temperature shift, the suspense building. Jasmine wasn't pulling an old blog post now. She was about to pull something fresh, something raw, something the students knew by heart. She picked up the tablet again, tapped the screen, and read aloud. You tweeted that George Floyd died of a drug overdose, not police brutality. You said, and I quote, the media lied about everything. Do you stand by that statement? The crowd gasped. Phones shot up. Even the moderators stiffened. Candace's face froze. She knew this was the moment. If she backed down, her base would call her weak. If she doubled down, she'd lose the room, and the clip would be devastating. Either way, this was a trap, and Jasmine had said it perfectly. The audience leaned forward, waiting. The auditorium felt like a courtroom in the seconds before a verdict. Candace adjusted her microphone, her hand trembling slightly, and tried to find a way out, but there was no way out. The auditorium was buzzing just seconds earlier. Students cheering, phones flashing, chants breaking out. But the moment Jasmine Crockett read those words from Candace Owens' tweet about George Floyd, the room fell into a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of boredom or pause. It was the silence of collective anticipation, every eye fixed on Candace, waiting to see if she would stand by it or back away. Owens adjusted her microphone, her hand trembling just slightly, and tried to compose herself. "I believe in following the facts wherever they lead," she said carefully, each word weighed like stepping stones across a river she knew could sweep her away. The line sounded rehearsed, safe, neutral. But Jasmine was ready. Her voice cut through the quiet like glass breaking. "The facts? Let's talk about the facts." She straightened, her posture commanding, her tone shifting from lawyerly precision to something deeper, heavier, like a preacher at the pulpit. "Fact: Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder by a jury of his peers. Fact: multiple medical examiners confirmed that George Floyd died from cardiopulmonary arrest, caused by law enforcement restraint and neck compression. Fact: every one of us watched a man beg for his life, call for his mama, while a police officer knelt on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The words hung in the air. The silence grew thicker. A few people in the back rows sniffled, the sound sharp in the stillness. Even the camera operators froze, lenses trained but motionless, as if afraid to break the spell. Jasmine didn't raise her voice yet. She lowered it, forcing the audience to lean in. "And you, Miss Owens, you looked at those facts, at that video, at that man calling for his mother, and you chose to defend the murderer. You chose to twist the truth for clicks, for applause, for followers. You decided that protecting your brand was more important than protecting the truth. That is what you stand by?" Candace's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She glanced down at her phone, maybe searching for a stat, a line, any escape route. But this wasn't a fight over numbers. This was a fight over humanity, and she had none of the ammunition for that. Then, from the front row, a young woman stood up. Tears streamed down her face. She clapped slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed like a drum in the hushed auditorium. 1 clap, 2, 3, then another student joined in. Then another. Within seconds, a wave of applause rose like a tide, rolling across the room until half the auditorium was on its feet. Clapping, crying, cheering, not for spectacle. Not for a punchline, but for the truth finally spoken with weight and clarity. Candace looked around, stunned. Her supporters, those who had cheered her earlier, were still in their seats, unsure, uncomfortable, some even clapping weakly as if afraid not to. The energy she fed on had evaporated, replaced with something heavier, undeniable. Jasmine let the ovation roll, then lifted a hand. The room quieted again, but the energy remained electric. She looked directly at Candace, her eyes steady, her voice like steel. "You want to talk about moral courage? You want to talk about being a truth teller? Real truth-telling is standing with your community when it matters. Real courage is calling injustice what it is, even when it costs you. What you did wasn't courage. It was cowardice dressed up as commentary." The words landed like a gavel. Candace's face, normally animated with smirks and sharp retorts, was pale, her jaw tight, her eyes darting like a cornered witness searching for an exit. She finally found her voice, but it cracked. "At least I'm not afraid to stand alone," she said, clinging to defiance. "At least I don't need the approval of the liberal establishment." The line felt rehearsed, but it rang hollow. Jasmine shook her head slowly. "No, Miss Owens, I don't stand alone. I stand with my community. I stand with the families I defended as a public defender. I stand with my constituents who elected me to fight for them. You stand with whoever pays you the most. There's a difference between being independent and being for sale." The auditorium erupted again, this time with a roar so loud Abby Phillip leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene or let it ride. Students were on their feet, cheering, stomping, raising their phones. Some were crying openly. Others were chanting Crockett's name. Candace tried to interject, "That's not fair," but her voice was swallowed by the crowd. She looked to the moderator, to the cameras, to her team off stage, but no one could save her. Not here. Not now. Jasmine pressed one final time, her words delivered with surgical precision. "The saddest part, Miss Owens, is that you're actually smart. You're articulate. You could have used your platform to have real conversations about real issues facing our communities. Instead, you chose to be a performance artist playing a character for an audience that will never truly respect you. They don't love you for your courage or your brilliance. They love you because you tell them what they want to hear. You're their black friend who makes them feel comfortable, not challenged. And that is your legacy. The reaction was seismic. The auditorium shook with noise, cheers, shouts, applause. Some students leapt onto chairs, others hugged. Even faculty members, usually reserved, stood clapping. It wasn't celebration so much as catharsis, a release of tension that had been building since the debate began. Candace stood frozen, microphone limp in her hand, her trademark smirk gone, replaced by something that looked like panic. Abby Phillip finally intervened, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're going to take a commercial break," but it was too late. The moment had already happened. Phones had captured it, tweets were already flying, hashtags already trending. Crockett destroys Owens was lighting up the internet before the cameras even cut. Candace Owens had walked onto the Howard University stage a conquering hero. But in this moment, this crossroads, she wasn't just losing a debate. She was losing the very image she had built her career on, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a round. She had redefined the fight. When the cameras cut to commercial, Candace Owens finally exhaled. She reached for a tissue, dabbed at the corners of her eyes, not from tears but from the heat of the lights, the sweat forming despite the blasting air conditioning. Her team swarmed her instantly, whispering strategy, shoving her phone into her hand. She scrolled, desperate, only to see the trending tab. Candace Crockett destroys Owens. The clip was everywhere. Still frame shots of her stunned face were already memes. Her makeup artist powdered her cheeks, but there was no fixing what had just happened. This wasn't about shine. It was about substance, and Jasmine Crockett had supplied it in spades. When the broadcast resumed, Abby Phillip's voice carried a tone of forced calm. "We're back live from Howard University, where tonight's debate between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and commentator Candace Owens has already been spirited," the audience chuckled knowingly. They were still buzzing from the George Floyd exchange, still replaying Crockett's words in their heads, still showing each other clips on their phones. For them, the debate was over. They'd already decided who had substance and who had slogans. Candace tried to push forward. She leaned into her microphone, her voice steadier now, though thinner than before. "At least I've had the courage to stand on stages like this knowing I'd face hostility. At least I've told uncomfortable truths. Unlike career politicians like Congresswoman Crockett, who just tell people what they want to hear." It was meant to sound bold. Instead, it sounded defensive, almost pleading. The students didn't boo. They didn't even laugh. They just sat back, arms crossed, waiting to see if she had anything left. Jasmine didn't take the bait. She didn't even look at Candace. She turned to Abby Phillip instead, her tone professional. "Let's talk about solutions, not insults. Because my constituents in Dallas don't call me to ask about Twitter debates. They call me when their schools need funding, when their sons get pulled over, when their rent goes up. That's what I came here to talk about." And just like that, the contrast sharpened again. Owens was stuck relitigating her own image. Crockett was building policy. When the topic turned to criminal justice reform, Candace attempted another strike. Congresswoman Crockett supported bills that put violent offenders back on the streets. That's dangerous for black families, but Jasmine was ready. "I was a public defender for 10 years. I've looked into the eyes of young men who were locked away for minor offenses while violent criminals walked free because they could afford good lawyers. Reform isn't about letting people off. It's about fairness. It's about making sure justice doesn't depend on your bank account." The crowd erupted again, not with the roar of a takedown, but with the nodding hum of agreement. Students clapped. Professors nodded. Even some of Candace's supporters looked unsettled, shifting in their seats. Next came economic policy. Owens repeated her familiar talking points about failed democratic cities. But after her statistics had been dissected earlier, the words landed flat. Each time she said facts, the students whispered to each other, fact-checking in real time, pulling up the context she'd left out. By now, they weren't intimidated by her confidence. They were bored by it. Crockett, by contrast, outlined specific programs, tax incentives tied to small business hiring, targeted infrastructure investment, debt relief for underfunded schools. She cited funding sources, case studies, real outcomes. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. And solid felt like victory. Owens tried to revive the fight. She leaned forward, her voice sharp again. You sound like every other Democrat. Promise after promise, excuse after excuse. You've had power for decades, and where has it gotten us? Jasmine didn't even raise her tone. It's gotten us civil rights. It's gotten us voting rights. It's gotten us the first black president of the United States. And it'll get us more if we keep fighting. What it won't get us is performative outrage on YouTube. The crowd howled, the words bouncing off the walls like cannon fire. Candace's face tightened again, the smile fading. She was trying to land punches, but every swing left her more off balance. The most telling moment came when an audience member, a Howard senior, asked both women what they hoped to achieve in the next 5 years. Owens went first. She rambled about waking people up, about exposing the truth, about not being afraid to stand alone. The words tumbled out, but they lacked focus. They sounded like filler, like someone stretching to run out the clock. Then Crockett spoke. In 5 years, I want to look back and know I've passed legislation that improves people's lives. I want criminal justice reform that keeps communities safe while ending mass incarceration. I want economic policies that create jobs in neighborhoods that have been ignored for decades. And I want to see young leaders, maybe some of you in this room, step up and demand better, from Democrats and Republicans alike. She paused, then turned toward Owens, her tone steady but firm. And I hope that in 5 years we're not still calling each other tokens and slaves. Our ancestors endured that reality. We honor them by disagreeing with dignity, not by reducing each other to insults. The auditorium erupted again, but this time it wasn't just applause. It was respect. Students leaned forward, captivated. Faculty members clapped. Even some of the conservative attendees nodded slowly, conceding the point. Candace looked down, her hands folded tightly in front of her. For once, she didn't interrupt. The debate rolled on, but the energy was different now. The room had shifted. The audience wasn't waiting for a zinger or a meme. They were listening intently to Crockett. Owens was still speaking, still swinging, but the fight was already decided, and when the closing statements came, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. Owens talked about standing alone. Crockett talked about standing with her community. Owens invoked truth-telling. Crockett invoked results. Owens walked off stage quickly, avoiding the media. Crockett stayed, talking to students, taking questions, connecting. The battle was over. The verdict was in. The debate ended, but the story was only beginning. Candace Owens left the stage quickly, slipping out a side door with her team. No selfies, no impromptu interviews, no post-debate strut. The woman who usually basked in the spotlight now ducked it, head low, eyes fixed on the exit. Her handlers shielded her from reporters as they hustled her into a waiting SUV. Cameras caught the scramble, but not her trademark smirk. That smirk was gone. Inside the auditorium, Jasmine Crockett lingered. She took photos with students, fielded their questions, hugged former professors. She didn't gloat, didn't taunt, didn't act like someone who had just dismantled her opponent on live television. She acted like someone at a homecoming, reconnecting with family. For Howard, she wasn't just a Congresswoman. She was proof that preparation, knowledge, and integrity could still win. Meanwhile, online, the firestorm erupted. By the time Owens's SUV pulled away, Twitter's trending page was already ablaze. Our Crockett destroys, Owens, Howard debate, receipts over rhetoric. Clips of the confrontation flooded timelines, racking up millions of views in minutes. The most viral? Jasmine's calm dismantling of Owens' George Floyd tweet. A student's shaky phone video captured the entire exchange, the facts, the silence, the standing ovation, and within an hour, it had crossed 5 million views. By midnight, it was the single most watched political clip of the year. Meme culture wasted no time. Screenshots of Candace's stunned face became instant reaction images. Captions like, "When you realize the clapback was researched, and this ain't turning point sis," plastered across feeds. Another meme showed a courtroom gavel slamming with the text, "Case closed." But the internet wasn't just mocking. It was analyzing. Political science majors stitched together threads fact-checking Owens in real time. with side-by-side charts debunking her statistics. Lawyers praised Crockett's cross-examination style. Activists called it a turning point in how Democrats should face conservative provocateurs, not with emotion, but with preparation. Mainstream media joined in. CNN replayed the George Floyd moment on loop. Their Chiron reading. Crockett fact-checks, Owens on national stage. MSNBC dedicated an entire segment to the debate, one commentator saying, "This was performance politics colliding with preparation, and performance lost." Even international outlets picked it up. The BBC ran a headline, "When Viral Rhetoric Meets Reality, Crockett versus Owens at Howard." In Nigeria, a Lagos newspaper framed it as two black women defining America's future political tone. In London, The Guardian wrote, "Candace Owens suffers worst defeat of her career, but the most telling silence came from Owens's usual allies." Fox News barely covered the debate, airing only her opening monologue about Democratic failures while ignoring the later implosion. The Daily Wire ran a piece insisting Crockett had been needlessly hostile, but even that article used no clips of Owens' responses, only still images. Ben Shapiro tweeted mild support, calling Owens courageous for walking into the lion's den, but notably avoided sharing any footage. Tucker Carlson, who once booked her repeatedly, didn't mention the debate at all, pivoting instead to an unrelated rant about border security. The message was clear. Even her allies saw the disaster and wanted no part of it. Still, her core base clung to her. On YouTube, she uploaded an edited highlights reel showing only her strongest lines and none of the fact-checking. But the comments section turned against her. Normally a wall of support, it filled with timestamps. "Show the part where Crockett bodied you with Baltimore stats." "Play the George Floyd clip, we're waiting." "Don't cherry-pick, Candace." "We saw the whole thing." Even more damaging, Owens tried to shift the blame. On her podcast the next morning, she claimed the debate was rigged, that Howard had stacked the audience against her. She described it as a setup from the start. But that narrative collapsed instantly. Students who had been in the room posted videos showing the audience's diversity, including conservative attendees who had cheered her early on before turning quiet. One black conservative in attendance tweeted, "Candace knew exactly what she was walking into. She called Howard the lion's den herself. You can't call it rigged when you lose. The fallout wasn't just online chatter. It had real-world consequences." Owens' speaking engagements at several universities were quietly postponed or canceled. Corporate sponsors grew cautious, unwilling to risk the optics of being tied to her viral defeat. Her management reportedly held heated meetings, scrambling to reframe her brand. A book tour originally planned for 30 cities shrank to 10, mostly in deep red markets. The title of her upcoming book was quietly changed too. It had been slated as Leaving the Democrat Plantation. After Howard, it was rebranded to the safer, vaguer Think for Yourself. Observers noticed. Screenshots circulated with the caption, "Even Candace doesn't believe in her own rhetoric anymore." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's stocks soared. Her congressional office reported a surge of donations, small-dollar contributions flooding in from across the country. Her campaign manager told reporters, "We've never seen this kind of response before." Young Democrats held watch parties replaying the debate, dissecting her strategy. Other lawmakers began openly saying they'd accept debate invitations they'd previously ignored. One congressman summed it up. "Jasmine showed us you don't have to be afraid of these people. You prepare, you stay calm, you tell the truth, and the bullies fall apart." Academics weighed in too. Harvard political science professors used the debate in classrooms as an example of rhetoric versus reality. Owens had slogans. Crockett had substance. In politics, substance still matters, one professor told his students. And perhaps the most powerful impact was on Howard students themselves. They hadn't just watched a political event, they'd witnessed a shift in the rules of engagement. One sophomore told a reporter, "I've seen Candace Owens' videos online, but I always felt like something was missing. Tonight I realized it was facts." Crockett showed us what real leadership looks like. Candace Owens still had her loyal base, her podcast, her conservative conferences. But something fundamental had cracked. The broader public, the swing viewers, the curious onlookers, they'd seen her dismantled. They'd seen her fold when faced with receipts instead of rhetoric, and in the world of viral politics, perception is power. Once it slips, it's nearly impossible to reclaim. A month after the Howard University debate, the dust hadn't settled. It had hardened into something permanent. Candace Owens still had her podcast. She still had her loyal base of white conservatives who loved her fire. But the broader world, the media, academia, even parts of the conservative movement, saw her differently now. The smirk, once her signature, no longer looked fearless. It looked fragile. Screenshots of her deleted tweets resurfaced. Tweets where she'd once called black Democrats slaves to the plantation. Gone. Quietly scrubbed. No apology, no explanation, just gone. But the internet doesn't forget. Screenshots spread with the caption, "Looks like someone learned her lesson." The Daily Beast ran a feature. Candace Owens's Great Deletion. They noted not just missing tweets, but purged YouTube videos, old speeches pulled down, entire chunks of her brand erased. Her team claimed it was rebranding. Her critics called it damage control. Either way, the evidence was clear. The Howard disaster had forced a retreat. Behind the scenes, the consequences were even sharper. Corporate sponsors grew cold. Universities stopped inviting her. A planned 30-city book tour shrank to 10, and not in swing states or liberal strongholds, but in the deepest of red territory where no protest was likely. Even the title of the book changed. From the aggressive Leaving the Democrat Plantation to the safer Think for Yourself. For a woman who built her career on defiance, the quiet retreat was deafening. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett soared. Donations to her re-election campaign spiked. Her office reported a flood of calls, most of them supportive. She became a rising star in Democratic circles, not because she'd destroyed an opponent, but because of how she did it, calmly, methodically, with receipts. Other Democrats took note. Lawmakers who once avoided debates with conservative firebrands began saying yes. "Jasmine showed us you don't have to fear these people," one congressman said. "You just have to prepare." Political strategists studied the Crockett playbook. Don't take the bait. Keep your composure. Know your facts. Let your opponent hang themselves with their own words. Professors built lectures around it. Media outlets dissected it. Activists replayed it at organizing meetings. But the real impact wasn't in politics. It was in culture. For too long, viral debates rewarded the loudest voice, the sharpest insult, the snappiest meme. Politics turned into performance art. Clip over content, spectacle over substance. Candace Owens had thrived in that environment, building a career on provocation. But Howard proved something crucial. Performance collapses when confronted with preparation. The students at Howard felt it most deeply. They hadn't just watched a debate, they'd witnessed a model of leadership. "That's the kind of politician I want to be," one student told a reporter. "Someone who knows the facts, stands with the community, and doesn't fold when the heat's on." Crockett didn't just win a debate. She inspired a generation, and for Owens, the lesson was harder. She learned what every bully eventually does. Sooner or later, someone stands up. And when that happens, talking points and theatrics aren't enough. In her later appearances, something had shifted. She still criticized Democrats. She still threw red meat to her base. But the plantation rhetoric was gone. The over-the-top insults were muted. She seemed less willing to go nuclear, more cautious with her words. Whether that was growth or just tactical retreat, only time would tell. But the truth was clear. The Howard University debate was a watershed moment. It showed that style cannot replace substance forever, that preparation beats provocation, that when you strip away the cameras and the clout, facts still matter, and maybe, just maybe, it signaled a shift in American political discourse. Away from the circus, back toward the courtroom. Away from the viral insult, back toward the real conversation. Candace Owens walked into Howard expecting to be the conqueror. She left exposed, diminished, and forever changed. Jasmine Crockett walked in with facts, preparation, and community behind her. She left not just victorious, but elevated. One woman burned her credibility. The other built her future, and the lesson was simple enough to fit into a single line. Preparation beats provocation. Every time,